do that again if you could.
Not sure I'll manage 2 sentences, Simon, but I'll do my best. The only thing we can be certain of is the knowing of experience. And in fact, not even the knowing of experience, as if the knowing of it were one thing and experience itself was something other than knowing. All we can be certain of is knowing. That's the only absolute certainty. I'm using knowing synonymous with consciousness, but I use the word knowing to try and bring it close to our experience. There is the knowing of the sound of my voice, the knowing of...
I'm winding a bit back here because I sort of jumped out of the last video in the middle of what he's trying to say here. So I wind back a bit, both for my sake and maybe also for yours, right? If that might help. I think he's sneaking in ideas of knowledge and certainty here, right? After doing all kinds of deconstructions and listening to philosophy in general, all sorts of places, videos, reading about it, podcasts, and so on, right? It seems to me that nobody wants to define anything. They might be, when they're pressed, they might be handing you some kind of a word salad kind of definition, but they just start to use these important philosophical terms at some point that he does, like he does here, does start to say knowledge and certainty, right? In a sort of a combined way with what we have recently talked about, as if it's natural that now we are arriving at an idea of knowledge and so on, right? And I guess it takes a bit of being used to listening to how people argue for various aspects of philosophy to be able to pinpoint this, right? It takes a bit of training, I suppose. And I've been training myself for, going on at least a decade now, right? So I feel pretty confident when I say that I've yet to find somebody who can argue really rigidly for philosophy. In some aspects, it might be fairly decent, and then it sort of breaks down into now I'm just sort of, hey, look, I was talking about knowledge there, and by the way, I'm also bringing in certainty, and say I can be certain about knowledge, when in fact, the only way I could define certainty is an elevated kind of knowledge, not being about knowledge, right? So it's a weird... maybe I don't need to explain it, but it seems to me that, and a way to explain what is going on is that those who are actually good at arguing rigidly for philosophy, they are actually kept away from doing philosophy in sort of because the academic side of things have been shanghaied by taxpayer money, right? So they are going to shut the fuck up, or they are going to be kicked out of the system so that all the useful idiots are pushed in academia. And therefore, academia is fucking screwed. You're better off not listening to any kind of academics, right? And these two guys are sort of half-ass academics, right? So I'm always aware of that aspect. And because it has been screwed up, philosophy basically in the last 100 or 150 years, there's sort of a desert of no philosophy where there needs to be some philosophy, right? Somebody extending their philosophy and doing it in a rigid manner and so on. There's just an open field where there's basically nothing. And all sorts of weirdos pop out and say, hey, I am going to be the one who found the holy grail of philosophy now, right? So all sorts of weirdos pop out in this scenario where the academics are hiding in their tax-funded ivory tower, right? Where they're circle-jerking each other into some kind of belief that their little pet subject of panpsychism is going to explain anything, right? Everything. So the basic landscape of philosophy is in the need of a annihilation, you could say, right? Get rid of it, right? Right? Take the starting point, take the Cartesian doubt, go to the ground level and start there, right? Forget the rest, right? There might be some, ground floor things like idealism. What are the basics? How do we approach it, right? We shouldn't, cast out the baby with the bathwater, right? But something has to give, right? All this monstrosity claiming to be philosophy at this point has to go away. There has to come some new thing, right? It has to be, in my opinion, that something has to be changed because it doesn't function, right? People are sitting there, oh, we are so philosophical. Oh, yes. Oh man, we have 500 PhDs each, and we are so good at this, right? Meanwhile, if some stupid idiot says, you have to take this injection, of course they're taking that injection, and they're telling everybody else to take that injection because of what, right? Because of their metaphysics, because of their knowledge, because of their ethics? No, because somebody in power, somebody with guns tells you to, right? So don't give me any fucking shit about being good at philosophy if you can't point to the obvious fucking elephant in the China store, right? So it pisses me off, man, right? All this, let me close my eyes for 10 minutes and concentrate. Maybe I can come up with an answer to this. Yes, it's knowledge about knowledge, and it's certain that it's knowledge about knowledge. Okay, so I explained it, right? Give me a fucking break, man.
The sight of your screen, the knowing of the temperature of the air on your face, the knowing of whatever emotion you may be experiencing. There's just the knowing of experience. Knowing is the only substance that is ever known or experienced. So anything that we posit outside of knowing is...
Now, I pointed out in my last video that if somebody using an idea of knowledge in their explanation of metaphysics, they're screwing with you, right? Basically, they have no fucking clue what they're talking about, right? Because knowledge is a whole separate ballgame in philosophy. Has nothing to do with metaphysics other than you need to have settled completely and utterly everything you need to do in metaphysics before you even attempt at doing epistemology, right? This guy is a fraud. He doesn't know what he's doing, right? At least he could say, okay, I have come up with an idea of how to use knowledge in metaphysics and how to combine the things. He doesn't do that, right? He just starts to use the term and talk about certainty and all sorts of shit, right? Basically, he's using a mental club to make you obey his philosophy. I am talking about knowledge here, right? Certainty, right? You better bow down because I am Spira. I have an Essentia foundation.
An abstraction, a mental abstraction that can never be verified. Because if we were to come in contact with it, all that we would...
Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe he's not a part of Essentia Foundation. I'm not actually sure. I don't really care, but I might be ahead of myself there, right? At least he is very associated with it, you could say, right? So, okay.
Know of it is the knowing of it. So knowing is the only certainty. It's the only thing, which is of course not a thing, that has ever been experienced or could ever be experienced.
Knowing is experienced. I mean, does he have any clue how stupid that sounds? Knowing can be experienced. But don't you need experience to have any kind of knowledge? Is knowledge not a reference to a kind of experience or a cognition from experience or something like that? You can't experience knowledge, right? So you don't need epistemology. You just say, knowledge arrived. I experienced knowledge, right? What color does knowledge have? What sound does it have? What taste does it have, right? So you're saying it has one of these. It has a taste at least, or a sound. Have you tasted knowledge, right? Have you seen knowledge? What color does it have? Does it have a color, right? Otherwise, you're fucking screwing with me, right? Oh, man.
Experienced by anybody. I'm implying that knowing is known by a person. I don't mean that. Knowing is that which knows. So this knowing is known by itself.
This knowing is known by itself. Okay, Mr. Mystic, right? This knowing is known. You're just coming up, you're just conjuring, you're just creating mystical imaginations that fits your bill, right? You can't experience knowing, and there's nothing that is knowing that can know from that level of insight that you cannot have. So you have a level of insight you cannot have that has a level insight you certainly cannot have, right? Or certainly it's one cloud castle on top of another cloud castle here, right? It's completely disconnected from anything that I can go and, have an experience of. And maybe that's the whole point. Treat the little people as if their stupid little experience is just their little personal whatever. Maybe almost like, these kind of illusionists, right? And then the big mind there, the big connection preach to the big mind is coming to tell you, yeah, it's a knowledge that has knowledge of knowledge, right? So you better do as I say.
That's all we can be sure of. So if we want to build a model of...
If we want to build, isn't that presupposition, right? Who said that somebody needs to build a model, right? It's a presuppositional, right? Another fallacy, right?
Reality. That is anything other than... Or
what is reality? I think this is the first time they mention reality now, right? I mean, it's just these words that people, of course, potentially probably have heard before. And maybe already have an idea about. So they're just tapping into preconceived ideas and manipulating these concepts and throwing them around and making them feel good. Yeah, there might be ripples out there. Oh, it sounds interesting. The ripple analogy. And Bernardo Kastrup is famous for his ripple analogy. Can we have it again, Bernardo? Give it to us. Oh, we love it. Oh.
Could ever be anything other than a mental abstraction, unrelated to our experience. Why don't we start with...
I want to hear that again. What was that? Let me see if I can rewind a bit.
That is anything other than, or could ever be... I'm implying that knowing is known by a person. I don't mean that. Knowing is that which knows. So,
knowing is that which knows? I mean, please give me a comment. How the hell do you understand that, right? Isn't it some kind of weirdo, circular, nonsensical statement? Knowing is that which knows, or something like... I mean, yeah, man, right? We are beyond, me taking this seriously, right? And I'm just deconstructed it to, throw the stake in the heart of the shit, right? It's... sorry about this dinging, right? Is anybody that, other than those who are wanting this kind of woo-woo shit, taking this seriously? I suppose not. I would say that anybody who understands the paradox built into materialism would freak out about these people doing this mental circle jerk here, right? They're going to inhibit Materialist, taking this idealism, or understanding the problem in why there is a hard problem and you can't get to a solution of it, right? These kind of thinkings, they are going to say, well, I don't care about this because they're crazy, right? They're not going to take you seriously. Knowing is that which knows. Give me a fucking break, man, right?
This knowing is known by itself.
The knowing is known by itself. When I'm standing in the grocery store and I'm saying, okay, what was it? I forgot my note. I think I needed tomatoes. What part of that is knowledge? How do I go about? I can't just say, yeah, the knowing is knowing the knowing, or something like that. Okay, so now I got the tomato, right? How do I go about finding that tomato if I want tomato? Can I use this for anything, right? How would I get from trying to get to the tomato using this statement of knowledge, right? And even certainty, certainty. And from that, go into some kind of ethics or more principle, right? It seems completely ridiculous to me, right? There is no heads or tails in this. It's dysfunctional, cloud castle sophistry, right? Woo-woo mystic shit, right? It's completely useless.
That's all we can be sure of. So if we want to build a model of reality that is anything other than, or could ever be anything other than, a mental abstraction.
If we want to build a model that is other than just a mental abstraction. But who says we need to build a model? Okay, first of all, right? Presupposition. Okay, let's say that I have, challenged also, right? I don't like that we thing, right? Why is he lumping me into that, right?
Related to our experience. Why don't we start with what we know, with what we have in our hands?
Well, what do you mean know? The knowing was knowing, right? The knowledge was known by the knower or whatever it was. I can't even rephrase it. So what that we, is that also me? Or is it some kind of, we all in this knowledge together or what? And you're just saying, yeah, this is what we know. So you better accept what we know because I'm in the we. I mean, what? I mean, I have no idea what he's talking about. It's like the guy who has never heard of biochemistry finding a dictionary of biochemistry words and just throw them at me and say, now I've done biochemistry, right? It's the same feeling I have. It's useless. I have no idea what he's talking about, man, right?
Knowing, consciousness, and only resort to
knowing consciousness. But don't you need to be conscious in order to know? Everything is just turned around, and the cart is before the after the horse, and before the horse, and left and right, and knowing is knowing is knowing is knowing. I mean, okay, there might be something philosophy in his mind that is functional, but what he says is like, a Scrabble that has been, thrown up in the air and has landed again, right? And yet say, hey, there's philosophy there, right?
Something outside of that, if our current experience cannot be satisfactorily explained using only consciousness, which it can. Not only can our current experience be explained very satisfactorily, referring only to knowing or...
But who says it needs to be explained? That's also presuppositional in a way, right? Why do you need to explain elephant? I mean, see, you could have some desire to do it and say, I want to explain it, okay, But do I need to explain it in order to get around, or both of us figure out whether or not we could eat or fuck or you know, whatever, do with that elephant, right? Don't do this at home, right? We don't need to explain it in order to eat it, right? What else? Why do you need that explanation? Isn't just because you have this freaky academic mind that you need to go and explain it. And maybe because you cannot be authoritarian or authoritative if you cannot come up with an explanation. I think this academic fetish, I need to explain, otherwise I won't know what I'm talking about. I can't say elephant without first explaining what is elephant. I mean, I don't need to have an explanation of that tomato in order to go and find and buy and eat that fucking tomato, right? So it's like he's presupposing some kind of ideal attempt at finding explanations. And maybe that is a smokescreen. You need to find the explanation. He wants to find it where you can't find it, right? Beyond the experiences. So he wants to attempt to stick his face through that wall, right? And say, yeah, because I have PhDs and philosopher, I have this, I can do woo-woo with my eyes closed for 10 seconds, right? Therefore, I can stick my hand through the wall that you can't, little peon, right? Because you're stupid, right? And I'm going to go out there and come back to you and say, there are ripples. And their big mind is knowledge of knowledge of knowledge and so on, right? And I'm going to tell you this is how we are going to live our lives because I've been there. But you can go there, right? Fuck you, man, right? Fuck off.
Consciousness. There are so many aspects of our current experience that...
Speak about your own experience, right? How do you have access to my experience? When you say our experience, right? You are saying that I have a similar kind of, or at least I have an experience. And because you have an experience, you're implicitly implying that I have the same kind of experience as you have. How the hell do you get to that? Have you heard of the problem of other minds, right? Isn't that one of the problems you are inferring by the statement here? But at the same time, you're just lumping everybody, 8 billion people, into your ideas of what is experienced, right? Without stating that that's what you're doing. So you're crowd controlling. You're sophistry manipulating the masses into, oh, come and listen to me. I'm a better priest than that guy over there. Yeah, they don't, they're materialist. Materialist. They're stupid. Come and listen to idealism. We have the right tone of voice and we have some nice glasses on and our hair is combed like this, right? I'm a real silver fox.
Cannot be satisfactorily explained under the prevailing materialist paradigm. So I could elaborate. I think that's
yes. The best known of which, of course, is the hard problem of consciousness. And I believe it was David Chalmers, who I believe also Bernardo, who came up with that. So could you just give a quick, brief explanation of actually what that is in simple terms and why it's not just a hard problem, it's a completely unsolvable problem under the current paradigm?
Under the current paradigm? What do you mean the current? Has somebody decided this is the paradigm we are working from? Or are you just appealing to some majority or something like that? Is sort of a majority vote here or something? Now I know this guy, he's telling us that he's too stupid to understand anything. So he's trying to also be some kind of devil's advocate or something. He's doing his best. Fair enough, mate, right? Okay. But maybe you can't get to an answer of the hard problem. And that is the problem, right? If you're creating the inside-outside dichotomy, you are on the experience side of things, right? And the things are the things in themselves, as Immanuel Kant would put it, right? And the things themselves you can never get to, because you need those experiences and the cognitions and all that follows from it in order to have anything to go with, right? So you need to bring those experiences along, and then you're stuck within that experience in that cockpit, as as Immanuel Kastrup, as Bernardo Kastrup said, right? So when you are trying to explain how the experience arrives from the metaphysical point of view, metaphysics suffer from the idea that your direct experiences is an actual outside, and therefore it should follow that it becomes mind at some point or experiences at some point. But that's because they should take that outside and say, no, that's also an inside. So it's all inside, and therefore whatever is on the outside is inaccessible. And that means the answer to the question, the hard problem, right? The hard question, the hard answer, maybe you could say, right? The hard answer is inaccessible, right? And then fuck off with your hard problem, because you can't get to it. Spend your time on something more constructive than trying to answer something you do not have access to answering, right? That is the problem. The problem is it's a meta problem of consciousness, right? It's a meta hard problem. Okay.
Dave framed the problem as follows. There is nothing about physical parameters in terms of which we could deduce.
Yeah. Now he's sort of conceptualizing a bit, right? The problem arrives, as I said, because they think that they have direct access to an outside, and it's described with all this physics, right? And then for some weird reason, there are these experiences at some point. There's light, and it travels and through the eyes, and sort of at some point it becomes a color, right? Now, why does it become a color, right? That's the question. And the hard problem is, it seems that nobody following the materialist metaphysics, which is basically implied, is not stated by materialists, right? Because they think it's given. They don't even realize, mostly, I think, that there's actually a metaphysics involved in their physics. So it's like, okay, but then they say, but it's just about a matter of time. We just put some electrodes on some brains, and at some time we will be able to, right? Not realizing that it's completely ridiculous. And the problem is not a lack of science, it's a lack of metaphysics in order to realize there's a paradox built into their thinking. It's functional when they stay in concepts, then science works. But as soon as you try to connect it to the experience, the qualia that all the scientists always bring along to do their experiments, right? Then it breaks down.
Even in principle, the qualities of experience.
And I might add, that's why they want to get rid of it, right? The illusionist was saying, yeah, but we don't need those qualia, right? It's just, weird experiences along for the ride, right?
In other words, the gap between the qualities that are nature's given, our experiences, our qualitative experience, that's pre-theoretical. It's what is given to us. It's how the whole thing starts. There is nothing about what we call physical parameters in terms of which we could deduce experience. So whatever brain arrangement you come up with, whatever pattern of brain activity you come up with, it may corresponds to the quality of warmth or to the quality of coldness, but there is nothing in terms of nothing about those physical parameters in terms of which we could deduce this is a hot experience or this is the experience of coldness. It's a completely arbitrary gap between the two. And Dave formulated this very precisely in 94. He puts himself down. He says, well, no, I didn't do anything. People already knew that. I just chose certain words. But of course, framing the problem is halfway to the solution. And the solution in this case is to take a couple of steps back, because we took a wrong turn at some point. We need to retrace our steps back and try a different understanding of what's going on, because what the hard problem shows is that there is an internal contradiction in the materialist way of thinking. And there is no way to solve that in the sense that we can continue in the materialist path and account for experience in terms of quantities.
No, but as long as you stay with the concepts or cognitions, as long as you are able to cognize elephant, you can do all these. Science takes one concept or one cognition and compares it to another cognition, right? It doesn't need the experiences in order, as long as it needs the experience to get to the cognitions, but as long as they can get to the cognitions, they no longer need the experiences. So they can, they bring out the experiences to get to the cognitions, and then they screw around with the concepts and the cognitions and the abstractions and so on, because through the experiences, they arrive at the concepts and then screw around the concepts in order to do science and say, when this concept is there and there are three of those concepts, they will interact and create this new concept and fall from the tower, right? Which is another concept, the tower, right? Science is not saying this color and that color, becomes this smell and so on, right? It can't do that, right? So science functions as long as you bring around your experiences and can cognize, and then the cognitions are used to do the science. That's why science is better than in this kind of idealism, in my opinion, because they always have to bring along their senses in order to do science sufficiently, because one of the rules of the scientific method is you need to do some experiment, and you can't do that without using your senses, right? So, yeah.
Incoherent already in principle, let alone in practice. We have to trace our steps back and try a different road.
So the one thing we know for sure is experience, and it comes from something.
Knows for sure. But do you classify knowledge as your experience? Because then if knowledge is experience, then knowledge is just another word for experience, right? What's the difference between experience and knowledge? If you're just saying we know experience, well, then knowledge is experience. And then you just added a new term to the phrase, rather than saying, okay, this part of my experience I classify as knowledge. Then you have the whole experience, and a part of it is knowledge, right? Is red knowledge? Is the color of elephant knowledge, and the sound of elephant and the taste of elephant is also knowledge, and then elephant is also knowledge, or what, right? Because elephant is not an experience, that's a cognition, right? So elephant can't be knowledge, but the color that was in the elephant is knowledge. Or I should not say elephant, I should just say gray, knowledge. But I'm not going down to the grocery store looking for red, right? I'm looking for tomato, right? So what part of this is knowledge, right? It's just that they're throwing around these terms as, they don't need to clarify anything here, right? Because they are simply the masters of philosophy, right?
That is outside of experience, namely matter, with no reason or why experience should rise from matter. So why has this leap been made that there's these things, stuff, and then bang, out of nowhere comes experience?
Look, if you were born inside the airplane cockpit and all you have ever had are the dials, your language evolves around the paradigm of the dials. And you try to make sense of everything in terms of dials. And that's what we are doing. And it's a little bit clueless, but it's understandable. It's wrong, but it's understandable to some extent. Our brain activity seems highly correlated with our experiences. If I put alcohol in my system, something changes in my experience. If a neurosurgeon goes around my brain poking it with an electromagnetic probe, he will induce all kinds of experiences in me. Well, we don't need to go that far. If I'm punched in the head, something happens to my experience. So we have all these correlations between experience and what we call physicality. So the easy intuition is, well, experience arises from physicality. Of course, there is a completely different way to see this, and once you get that, it's obvious that that other way is the way to go. But I understand the common superficial intuition that the arrow of causation goes from matter to consciousness, because there is such.
I think it's a very convoluted way of putting it. I don't disagree, I think. But the paradox is simply that the experience is, without any further philosophy, considered the actual outside, right? If I'm looking at my loudspeaker there, right, I am saying that loudspeaker is outside my mind. But how the fuck could it be if I need an experience of it? There's colors, there's not sound at the moment, I could possibly taste it, right? If it's outside my mind, how could I experience it, right? And then they say, yeah, but then there are concepts in here that aligns. It's the I suddenly remember that I tried to come up with a notion or an description in the last part about truth. It's the correspondence theory of truth, right? That because I have identified that outside, those colors, those shapes are out there. My concept in here is aligning with that outside and saying loudspeaker, right? I think that that's how they work it out, that then there's a correspondence between loudspeaker here and loudspeaker there, not realizing that some of it has to be in here and can't be out here, so there's a split between the experiences and the concepts. So if they're saying there's a correspondence, then the correspondence is between the concept and the qualia out there, but that doesn't correspond, right? They're two different kinds. One is qualia, the other is conceptualization. So no matter how you put this thing with the inside-outside together, there can't be a direct access to that outside. All of this experience I have must be confined within the experience itself, you could say, right? There's the experience. And when I make that leap of imagination, you could say, that there's an outside, what am I basing it on then, right? And that the habitual thinking is that outside is almost arriving to you, right? It is imposed on you. I am experiencing it's everywhere, right? The outside is everywhere. I can see my hands out here and all that, right? This laptop is outside me and so on, right? But that's just an interpretation of my experience. I can do that. I can say, well, that's an experience of the outside. I could do it, but I without realizing that I'm creating a paradox. The way I have to approach it then, when I realize it's a paradoxical statement, I have to say my experience is a representation of something outside. If I want that outside-inside dichotomy, then what I am experiencing, that loudspeaker, has to be an experience inside. And if I'm saying it's outside, that which I'm experiencing can merely be a representation of something outside that I do not have access to then, right? Because otherwise, if I have access to it, it can't be an outside, right?
Tight correlation between patterns of brain activity and even anatomy and the contents of our inner experience.
Just something I want to add. So, Rupert, you talk often about the perennial understanding. So this is not new. This is thousands of years old. Yet physicalism, materialism, the current model, is actually relatively new, is it not? And Bernardo, can you just explain a little bit from a history?
Okay, so the argument is that somebody came around and corrupted it using science. No, I think that the one that has been around for the longest is the default setting, which is materialism, right? I think that, as I said, the caveman who sat down and said, maybe the saber-toothed tiger is merely in my mind, if he even had an idea of mind, right? maybe it's just something in my mind. And how do I know there's an outside? Well, I don't know there's an outside if I only have something in my mind. So why would I say there's something outside? So that saber-toothed tiger over there, that might just be some weird stuff in my mind, right? And while he's sitting there thinking, he's being eaten, his leg is being eaten by the tiger, right? So the other caveman who said, that's an outside, that's a saber-toothed tiger, let me run the other way, right? That guy would survive, while the philosopher would be eaten, right? It was only when sufficient amount economics could appear that people had sufficient time in order to, and capabilities to think, meta-thinking, that they could actually sit down and think along these lines, right? So I think materialism goes back millions and millions of years, right? While idealism, or its cousins, is only a couple of thousand years old, right?
Historical point of view, the role the church and scientists who didn't want to be burned at the stake played in the development of that.
Okay, in the 16th century, early 17th century, in the beginning of science, scientists realized that it was very handy to describe the qualities of perception in terms of numbers. Like, if you assign a number of kilos to a piece of luggage, it's a nice description of how it feels to lift that piece of luggage. So numbers arise as descriptions of the universe of perceptions. And at some point in the fight between science and the church, because the church started burning some scientists, like they burned Bruno at the stake in 1600, it became convenient, socio-politically speaking, to try to carve out a space for science that left the church feeling unthreatened. So, and Descartes was instrumental in that. So the story that they came up with was the following. Instead of these numbers being descriptions, let's make them a thing in themselves. Let's make them a reality. Let's say it's matter. So the numbers became not only a description, now they were a thing in themselves called matter. And that was the domain of science. And everything that had to do with qualities and consciousness, in other words, all we have, that's the domain of the church. And of course, the church leaders probably thought, yeah, okay, go ahead in your fool's errand, and we are happy if you leave the psyche, the soul, the mind, the qualities, the consciousness to us, because we know that's all that exists. In the beginning, the people of the Enlightenment, later in this game, in the 18th century, they were still aware that this was a political move, so scientists wouldn't be burned at the stake. Denis Diderot, one of the two authors of La Encyclopédie, perhaps the founding document of the Enlightenment, he's on record saying, well, no, materialism doesn't quite work, but we need it in order to fight the church. So that awareness was still there, that this was not a philosophy motivated.
Fight the church? Did they really say that?
By reason. This was largely motivated by short thinking and politics, important politics if you are afraid for your life. But at some point in the 19th century, halfway in the 19th century, we've lost the notion that this was a political move. And we started thinking, this is really what's going on. There are only quantities. So that was the moment when we replaced the territory with the map.
I'm just trying to relate to this. I think this is a story he's sort of conjuring up. It has sort of his justification to some extent that the scientists knew that they will fucking be burned at the stake at this, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition except the scientists, right? It must have some truth to it, but this is not an explanation why there are different kinds of metaphysics here, right? I understand that if way back that there might be some of these early scientists who say, yeah, we understand, I understand that there is idealism is closer to, but there's also still science. You can, it's not like idealists say, well, you can't do science. It's ridiculous. Science is ridiculous. Don't do it. They will also say there's science, right? So how do you go about this duality, so to say? I just think, as I say, materialism is the default setting. It has been for millions of years, right? So then along comes idealism and religion and so on, right? And tries to grab hold of the control of the people. It's always about control, right? Controlling the masses, controlling people, basically winding all the way back to mommy, and mostly mommy, but also daddy, but mommy controlled daddy using religion, right? It's also about controlling the family, getting and children not rocking the boat and whatever, right? Excommunications and ostracizations, and it's all this being a part of it, or not losing being a part of it, and staying with the narrative and don't rocking the boat and all this shit, all this, let's say, culture, right? The default setting, in my opinion, is materialism. Then along comes some kind of idealism that more or less, to some extent, is grown out of religion, right? Could be, maybe, or aligns itself at least, right? And then science comes back and say, no, we have to do some science, right? We can't just live in 1,000 years of dark ages and just thinking that Jesus is coming to save us, or, we will get our benefits when we are dead, right? It doesn't work, right? And then science comes back and creates a lot of economic value that the political class is stealing and creating Marxism and saying all those creating value are evil. Let's steal their money, right? And create armies and kill each other. 270 million killed by their own government in the 20th century, right? I don't think he'll go into that, right? Because the political class is more like priests and religious people than they're scientists, right? They understand that the scientists are creating value. The politicians just want to get hold of it, right? Controlling the minds of the people in order to steal from the productive.
And then we started trying to pull the territory out of the map. That's the hard problem of consciousness. It doesn't work. You can't pull the territory out of the map. You can't pull the world out of what was a description of the world. But instead of acknowledging that we are totally off on a tangent here, we say it's a problem. And in version 2, 3, or 10 of the map, we will be able to pull the territory out of the map. Well, go ahead, try. Pull a chair while you wait.
Rupert, I'm going to give you two questions and take your pick. Do you either want to say something about the pulling the territory out of the map, that sort of analogy, or the fact that this habit has continued over the last few centuries, and perhaps why, in your opinion, that has this model has continued and just been passed down without much introspection?
Because it refers to the default setting, right? Oh, there he is again, closing in his eyes. He's the guru. He's sort of concentrating. You can see it, right? He's so virtuous. He's trying his best to concentrate. Oh, yes, I am going inside myself. I'm going into my mind. I am...
I think it continued. It's been perpetuated.
This is sophistry, right? He's manipulating you with this. Oh, I'm so virtuously introspective. I'm closing my eyes. See?
Simply because it seems to be consistent with the way we perceive. As Einstein said, our common sense, the evidence of our common sense perceptions, are a series of prejudices that most people acquire by the age of 18. It's just Jane on the streets of Paris. Everything about her experience, everything about her friends and her colleagues' experience seemed to corroborate this belief that her experience is generated by matter. Going back to Bernardo's analogy of being punched in the face, someone comes up to I'm going back to my dream analogy. Someone slaps Jane on the face. Her internal experience correlates with that. She feels pain. What caused the actual experience, the knowing of her experience? It was a physical hand on her physical face. And it seems that most of her experience seems to be explicable by this paradigm. It seems to hold up until you start questioning it. Now, what is it that causes most people to question it? Suffering. If we didn't suffer, there would be no reason.
Suffering is an interpretation, isn't it? Pain is not necessarily suffering, right? If I'm at the dentist, and I know I'm presupposing a bit here, right? But I'm putting arguments into his mouth that might not actually be there. But I have to clarify what I mean, right? If I'm at the dentist and he pokes my tooth, right, and I say, that hurts, is that suffering? No. It's a necessary part of getting my tooth fixed, potentially, right? Is it suffering? Well, I'm gaining something, and I'm getting some benefits, and I'm getting some there's a cost and there's a benefit, right? The cost is the pain and the money I have to pay to the dentist. And the benefit is my toothache goes away, right? Everything is based in a balance between a cost and a benefit, right? You can't just say, suffering. I'm having pains sometimes and I'm suffering. Yes, but the pain is there to balance your benefits and your costs, right? This is also a fallacious, it's a sign of bad thinking, in my opinion. I'm suffering. Government, come and, remove my suffering. Yes, give me an injection. I'm suffering because you told me I'm suffering. It's dangerous and I'm anxious. Give me an injection.
To question our view of the world. On the contrary, we would think the happiness I experience is a confirmation that my view of the world is correct. We would never question anything. And that's why so many people are first open to the possibility that we are discussing here through the experience of suffering. Their life falls apart. They realize something's not working. And it's not just today that
it may not be because of the metaphysics that it's not working, right? Now, you could go about the way you judge what is going on. You do not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily follow that you need to have perfect metaphysics in order to get a good idea of what to do in your life, right? I think mostly people are suffering because they have been screwed around with by crazy people, right? And they have learned to self-attack rather than attack those who try to manipulate them. And those manipulators might not have any clue about good metaphysics, right? Usually they have screwed up metaphysics like religion and such, right? When people's lives comes apart, as he frames it, it's usually because they have got shitty metaphysics, not materialist metaphysics, right? Because if you have materialism, you always need to bring around your empiricism, right? And those who are screwing with your life is telling you not to trust that empiricism, but rather listen to their screwed up fantasies, right?
it's not working. It gets worse the older you get. As Henri David Thoreau said, most people lead lives of quiet desperation. You get halfway through your life, and you.
I feel the sophistry here, right? All this. Oh, I'm closing my eyes. I'm so concentrated. You should take this as the deepest insight into human psychology and the suffering of the people. If you're suffering, you better listen to me because I'm here. I'm your guru. I am going to save you. I have seen the ripples. There's a big mind out there who wants you to obey. Oh.
It's not working. Relationships, activities. You've experienced enough suffering to no longer be able to keep.
This is also a trick, right? And you see that all over the place. What are they called? People who want to help you get a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or family therapy, and it's sort of all these people who have been screwed around with. All sorts of people come in and say, "I'm going to save you," right? "I'm your savior. Listen to me. This happened over there. Now you go and listen to me because I'm perfect. I have my mind is perfect. I have all the insights. So you better listen to me because I'm so smart," right? Same old sophistry, right?
Keep it at bay through objects, substances, activities, relationship. You've been failed by life sufficiently often to probe a little bit deeper. Could there be something about my attitude that is responsible?
If you're suffering, let me get back to that. It has become because you have been lured into a place where somebody else can take advantage of you without you getting back at them. And it will be very hard for you. The consequences of you pulling the cord from this situation will put you through a lot of hardship, just like Nietzsche pointed out, right? You have been put in a situation where your energy and your life can be siphoned off to somebody else who is sort of being parasitical on you. That's what the civilization and the state and welfare. It's all something that's there to control people so that somebody else can take advantage of you, right? People fucking hate individualism because in the end, if everybody's individual, they will have the possibility of say no thank you to interacting with you. And you might end up in a situation where everybody else goes in another direction because nobody have anything about that which you can, provide, right? And that anxiety creates the need to control people so they fucking stay here so I can take advantage of them, so I can get the things I want, right? That's the anxiety. People are suffering because they willingly participate in being used as a source of parasitism. And it takes them maybe 40 or 50 years before they grow up so much and have so much experience as wisdom. And they can finally see there's something here that doesn't look right, right? While they're young, they have all the hormones and want to fuck around and have sex, and then it's all goddamn, I got a family now. Okay, now I build a family, and then the children move away from home, and then all of a sudden, what the hell is here? What did I actually do, right? What happened? Oh, I was taken advantage of here, and I was taken advantage of there. Who is responsible for that, right? At the end of the day, who is the fucking responsible people for this situation that you're suffering, if you're suffering? There are two answers, right? Maybe only one. Mommy and daddy, right? And I would say mommy usually controls daddy, right? If she cannot control daddy, he will no longer be daddy, or he will never become daddy, right? So mommy controls everything, right? The hand, the rocks, the cradle is creating the suffering, if they're suffering.
Might I have got something wrong? And for most of us, it's suffering that opens this door. So for me, it was. Although I had this very early intuition, aged 7, that everything is a dream in God's mind. And then
Oh, he had sort of a dream. And you want to inflict then on the world population, of course, because I had a dream. I had some interesting dream when I was 13, and therefore it must be brilliant philosophy because I had a dream. Give me a fucking break. And he doesn't call himself a spiritual. No, because it has, connotations he doesn't like, but he wants to be it anyway, right?
I forgot that intuition as I grew up. It was suffering that reignited my interest in these matters. In fact, in my case, it was a very particular experience when the girlfriend I was with, my first girlfriend, with whom I thought I would get married and have 4 children and live happily ever after, ended
that fantasy.
our 3-year relationship in a 2-minute phone call. And for the first time in my life, I became aware of the extent to which I had invested the thing that I loved the most, namely happiness, in objective experience. This cracked my world. My world had already been cracked by my parents' divorce, but this was a crack that I could no longer plaster over. Am I going to spend the rest of my life investing the thing that I love most in life, which is peace or joy, in something which is inherently unstable? This brought urgency to what had then, I was already interested in these matters, but it became a passion. There's something must be wrong about my model of reality. What can I know for certain is true? And if I were to start...
What can I know for certain is true? That is 3 big ideas in philosophy he is slamming together here, right? Now, I don't care too much his woo-woo dreams and his... fine, that's a good starting point for philosophy as any I can come up with, right? Fine, but it's not an explanation. It's not metaphysics that he had some suffering and he had some dreams when he was 16 or whatever, right? That's the woo-woo part of it, right? And you're creating this elaborate story that rubs you the right way, maybe, or something that you say, oh, he sounds like he's such a virtuous person. Oh, he's good. I was going to some point now, I lost my train of thought there. Oh, I rewind a bit.
There's something must be wrong about my model of reality. What can I know for certain is true? And if I...
Yeah, that was the know for certain is true, right? I mean, what can I know for certain is true? You have to have a definition of truth, you have to have a definition of knowledge, and you have to have a definition of certainty, right? And these are 3 monumental terms in philosophy, in my opinion, right? And he just slams them together in this sort of story about his childhood and his youthful and the pussy that got away, right? Oh, man. If he's not sensitive to, I cannot just slam 3 huge terms together and throw them at people while I'm talking about my shitty youth, right? As if that is then he hasn't put his shit together correctly, in my opinion. He doesn't know how to focus on what is worth focusing on. He's rather focusing on his own story, his own existential angst, his own suffering, and therefore you have to listen to him, right? Slamming 3 huge terms together, that's just something he does on the fly, right? Well, I'm saying that's what I need to understand. That's what you need to define. Otherwise, I don't give a crap about your suffering. I'm not saying I won't sympathize with it, but we're doing philosophy here. Why we are not doing, psychiatry, right?
They were to start there and hold on to that, and only lead a life that was consistent with that. What kind of a life would that be?
So,
okay. So he's trying to come up with a good life, right? And he wants so bad that life to be perfect. And maybe he has come up with a version that he finds to be perfect, and therefore he has to tell everybody about it, right? rather than defining the terms. But it's nice to have this hammer of philosophy, right? Because that's something that you can get a PhD in, right? And you say, hey, I have a PhD. I have done philosophy, and I'm going to tell you about my woo-woo shit, and you're going to eat it raw because I can close my eyes for 10 minutes and look like I am, going into the big mind, right? Please share, like, and subscribe. Consider the Discord board below, or a donation if you think my hard work here is worth supporting, which I hope you think. And otherwise, have a nice day. See you in the next one.